There are always trade-offs in any stage and any phase of the company. And so as you're building your own company, my advice is really assess the trade-offs. And if you can truly trade off, then fine. But if you can try to find a way to actually answer the key questions that you need to, do that. I see a lot of companies that may have traded off things, either time or resourcing or capital constraints, and they don't end up always in the best hands or in the best place in the end.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have a very special guest with us, Shetal Vyas, as Senior Vice President on Commercial Strategy and Development at Ardelyx. She joins us to share her insights on how pharmaceutical companies can overcome the growing pressures they face and adopt digital-first strategies to maximize product timelines and stay competitive. Shetal brings extensive experience in leading commercial operations and is passionate about helping pharma companies navigate today's rapidly evolving landscape. Pharma companies are being squeezed from all sides, the looming patent cliff, valued at over $200 billion through 2030, and pricing pressures driven by regulatory changes like the Inflation Reduction Act. Shetal's approach focuses on reimagining customer engagement and implementing digital-first strategies that go beyond just adopting new technologies. Hey, Shetal, are you ready to be our guru today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this.
We're excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong learner, and the learning actually not only stays within, the professional realm. I've actually started to explore quite a bit of interest level learning just to figure out things from my curiosity in that lens. So about a year and a half ago, I started wine school. And I ultimately ended up with a level 3 sommelier certificate, all for the experience of understanding what's in a bottle, the culture of what's in that bottle, and really developing my own palate to understand and actually, figure out the science behind it. And really, really interesting. So something interesting there. It's out of curiosity. I don't believe I'll do anything with it, but it's one of those things. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so I've got to keep practicing.
I like the keep practicing part, and that's actually interesting. I happen to live in West Michigan, and there's a number of micro wineries along the whole Lake Michigan coast here, and it's really quite something. I'm learning a little bit. I'm not as accomplished as you are, but it's really interesting to try the different sorts of wineries out there and some of their labels.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely a need for a resurgence on viticulture across the globe. It is not a dying, but a shrinking industry. But there's so much history, and then there's so many new little wineries, and like mid-size, and even the U.S. wine culture is changing quite a bit.
Yeah, that's fun. We'll have to talk offline about that at some point. But I was interested in your role at Ardelyx. As we talked in the introduction, pharma companies are facing unprecedented pressures from the patent cliff and then pricing regulations on top of that. So I'm just kind of curious how you see these factors shaping the future of pharma commercialization. Can you provide us some insights there?
Yeah, Tom, I think it's not just my lens. I think as an industry, the lens is really about getting product to patients who need it. And so, especially in the commercial stage, what is the best way to do that at the lowest cost or out of pocket for a patient? And I think what we're aiming to do from a macro environment makes sense if you look at it from that lens. How we get there and how we actually execute on it are the things that we've got to figure out from now until, when we do figure it out, and then we'll have other changes. We are in a very complex commercial landscape in our industry. And so, factors that need to be taken into consideration from a payer perspective, from, a PBM perspective, a provider and, healthcare delivery standpoint, and then the cost of the patient. It's not just out-of-pocket costs. When you think about different therapeutic areas, you really have to start to think about financial toxicity of getting to appointments, the care around that. It's not just the patient, then you start to think about the caregiver. So there are lots of different complexities to solve for. And I think one of the things that I've learned as I've grown in my career is that you can also go at this from a very simple view and try to find the best, most direct way to get product to a patient that needs it and work with the provider to ensure that we can do that. So I do think there's a lot of possibility for us to streamline more. One of the things, and you mentioned this earlier in the intro, that I really try to do is try to figure out the best digital aspects and how we can implement digital first strategies to get information to patients and also then potentially get product to patients. There are lots of new models that have come into play in that respect as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I like your simplicity approach because as you're talking, I'm thinking about how complex that really must be with different states, different health systems, different providers. I mean, it seems pretty daunting.
Absolutely. And at the same time, no, because I think we have an industry that has dealt with these complexities for
Hmm.
decades, right? And so I think we're ready to handle those complexities. I just think when we are able to work through those in the most efficient way, there's value to all stakeholders.
Sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. And, you mentioned digital, right? And as I look at least from my perspective, I know I'm sometimes confused about what digital is. So maybe you can help us, from a pharma perspective, what digital is and isn't, and maybe explain what digital first commercialization truly means. Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's interesting because most industries actually operate in a digital ecosystem, and pharma has been slower to adopt.
Hmm.
And the way I sort of distill down what a digital ecosystem really is, typically we've put brand at the center of our commercialization strategies. And when you get to digital first commercialization, it's really more of a customer centric view. And so you put the customer, whether it be patient, provider, payer, you put the customer at the center. And when you do that, you then get to a point where you actually are enabling your engagement and your engagement strategies through data and understanding and really understanding the journey that that customer is going to and how your product can help in that journey. And so it really is a shift in that engagement strategy, which then is then a data strategy, which then goes out to the digital strategy. Oftentimes, when I talk to folks in the industry, I hear, "Oh, we are in a omni-channel world." Let me throw that word out there because it's almost a dirty word in our industry because so many companies have struggled with their omni-channel journey. And I ask, so what does that mean to you? And they say, oh, well, we've got, our digital channels, we've got our sales channels, we do some next best action through our sales channels. So we're enabling some data and, insights from that. And that's really that's a multi-channel journey. It's not really thinking through digital first opportunities to start to engage providers, patients, to really engage them earlier in their journey to get to ultimately, if your product can benefit a patient, to get to your product, right? So putting that customer in the center is what I advocate for. And that's what I believe is the real value from a true digital journey standpoint.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm thinking you must have done a lot of education with just even within your organization as to what that is, and maybe changing that whole perspective. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Yeah, and so the good news is, if and within my current organization and previous organizations, if I get the answer that, oh, we've got social, we've got our digital channels, we've got several different opportunities to engage from a closed circuit TV standpoint, those are great foundations. And that's not easy to already establish, right? So starting there is great. The next part, and this is the more difficult part, is to actually bring those together to understand your customer perspective in almost a 360 way. And so you've got to sort of pull that together. And that next step, when you establish that, that's the big part of moving to a digital first view in your organization. So I've done not just, I think it's not just education, because I think most people understand it. It's the how we get there
Mhm.
is the education part.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you might be aware, we have a lot of entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs that listen to us at MedTech Gurus, and I often hear about roadblocks when trying to implement digital strategies, and you touched on that a little bit too. So, what are some of the more common obstacles that you've seen, and then maybe how do you overcome some of those? Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, Tom, and maybe not an exhaustive list, but I'll start with data.
Hmm.
We are data rich in our world, and especially in our industry. The way we use data and how we receive data leads to almost a fragmented view. And so timing of receiving that data and actually receiving it in very, comprehensive ways is very fragmented. So bringing data together is very challenging. And I will say the last 7-ish years, and I say that really clearly because this is sort of where I think the inflection point has been. Up until then, that was a big struggle. And I think industry partners have come in and really provided great solutions. So there are multiple industry partners who have solutions on bringing that data together in a consolidated way, in a stepwise approach, so that you can actually look at that customer 360 view and really garner insights from that data. I think engaging them and actually pulling that data together and having a roadmap to getting to a full data strategy is the first place, I think. And it's a struggle because people don't actually have an end in mind of where they want to go. If you can have that end in mind of, I would like to see a 360, and what does that mean, and work backwards to where your current state of data is, you can sort of map out how to get there. And I think there are very strong industry partners. I'm not going to name any. This is not an advertisement for anyone, but I've worked with a good number of them in my career, and I think they've gotten there. Prior to that, the reason I say that 7-year inflection point is prior to that, pharma companies went at it alone. And I think that was a real struggle. And we learned a lot from those struggles, and almost to a detriment, because those struggles were never resolved internally. And many smaller companies said, we're not going to spend the effort, the dollars behind that because it hasn't worked. I think we're beyond that now. And so I think that's the first part. The second aspect of it is then you've got your data and your insights. How do you ask the right questions, and what insights do you act on? And that's a skill gap that we have to upskill to. And so that skill gap, the way I've actually approached it in organizations that I've helped with this type of work, is really at getting a baseline understanding and what are the real key areas of engagement that are working today, because you don't want to take away. And I think that's also a fear point for many. If it's working today, we don't want to disrupt it. So what do you continue to do while you're on this digital first journey? You maintain what you have that's working, and then you build upon that. And so really then understanding the skill sets and the analytical thinking, the insight generation that's required, and tying it to decision making and making sure that you've got that full circle in place. That's a big part of this journey. And many get stuck on that as well because they don't actually think through that. Now that you've got this in place, we've got to start to upskill. Mm-hmm. The last, and it's not like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, but the third one, and that's really top of mind for me, is any change effort, especially this change effort. We're talking about technology and digital and everything, but it's a people effort. And so you've got to bring your people along and have them also buy in and understand where we're going. So one of the biggest things, I've talked about this at several conferences, I ask a question of the audience, and the audience is full of, big pharma companies, mid-sized companies. I ask a question, who's on, this journey? People raise their hand. Keep your hand up if you feel you're stuck or you are not progressing in the journey. And the majority of the hands stay up. And these are companies that have resources and smart people, right? We can't figure this out. I don't think it's that. I think it's that the change management efforts are not as tight as they should be. And so I'm a big proponent of communicate early, communicate often. This is not an exercise to reduce people. This is an exercise to enhance and elevate how we engage our customers. And what does that look like? And you really have to show them and articulate what that looks like early and often and bring people along on that journey.
Yeah, that's really helpful, right? And I'm thinking about, the folks that are stuck, right, at certain phases. And I'm thinking, I guess initially it's some of the smaller companies, but I can see larger companies getting, kind of caught up in this too. So I'm wondering if let's maybe take it a little more granular, if you can kind of walk us through how companies might rethink some of their engagement strategies so maybe they don't get stuck in today's digital landscape. Do you have any thoughts for us there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's one of the questions I get from audiences when I speak as well is, you know, we're at this point in our journey. How do we get unstuck and where do we go from here? And one of the things that's worked in the past, and I think is a really great learning for a lot of people, is even if you're stuck, you actually progress from the starting point to where you are today. And that required some people to buy in. And can you lean on them and pull on them to be champions, to revamp and reinvigorate the program? And so, really understanding. So, let me give you a more granular example of this. If you have your Salesforce with, your CRM enabling next best actions, there are going to be salespeople and leaders who have had experience at prior companies, this company in the past somewhere, that do this really well. And they've adopted it very early and quickly, and they're actually getting value from it. Can you bring those examples out? Can you ask them to coach their peers to actually help others adopt, right? Really bringing that human touch and then taking what they've learned, and every organization is going to be different. You're not going to have the same outcome at every organization or every project. You certainly can take that and pull that into more of a formal training program. And there's nothing that says you can't go back and reset. If you didn't actually bring people along and tell them often and early where you're going, then this is the time to do it, right? So really go back and lessons learned and really think through how can you action the lessons learned to turn it into a positive momentum again for the program.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. And I might put you on the spot here for just a moment because I'm listening to that process, and I'm thinking it's really very much an innovative process as well. So I'm wondering if you had like any aha moments or had an outcome that you went to an endpoint where you thought at the beginning of the journey, we'd never get to that point, or it took an interesting direction. Do you have any examples for us like that?
Yeah, it's you went off script, Tom, but I will answer
Yeah.
the question. Actually, I think it's a great question. Um, we were actually having this conversation around a journey and the end point, and two people in the meeting actually said, "I didn't think we were going there at all. I thought we were. I mean, the X is defined. I thought we were going to Z." And that was the aha moment.
Hmm.
We were at a let's sign the next phase of this project and approve it and move forward. And we had to pause. And if these two individuals didn't understand where we were going, then how many others didn't understand? And so you've got to take that time to say, what do we need to do to get everybody to the same page and that same vision so that we can progress to a successful order. I think I got lucky in that situation because you don't always have the opportunity and people don't always voice. I thought it was different than what it is today. Some people actually, will have the conversation, the water cooler conversation. So these are cultural aspects that you have to have in place when you're doing something like this, right? You have to be able to empower people to speak up and say, I didn't think that was where we were going at all. And it also actually for 1 minute had me question, is our X defined in the right way, or do we need to
Hmm.
consider Z?
Yeah.
And so I think that's also on the table.
Yeah, and sorry to throw you the curveball there, but I'm just seeing how that could happen with that kind of engagement and really kind of changing the focus, right? When you talked about putting your customer or putting that patient at the center, right? Where that might just generate some creative thinking that and a perspective that many organizations might not have had before, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when I start to think through how we would implement a digital first journey, typically it starts with a business case, right? So we do get very passionate about the opportunity to serve more patients and engage the audience in a more meaningful way, to meet providers where they are when they want the information. And, engagement levels are off the charts when you look at some of these case studies. And so, how do we replicate that? So, we get tied up in a lot of that. And then you start to peel it back a bit as you start to progress, and you start to recognize maybe everybody's not on the same page. We all want the same outcome, but what this looks like and how we get there, we have to be on the same page of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, Shetal, in your role at Ardelyx, your team is seeing some tremendous growth, if I've got this right, in some of your first-in-class therapies. And I'm wondering if you can share with us, without giving away the company store, any, intellectual property or information like that, but what are some of the key principles or frameworks you use when you're developing a commercial strategy for high growth in like a biopharma company like yours? But maybe more so, how can you translate those principles to other areas of healthcare innovation for some of our gurus out there? Do you have any thoughts for us?
Yeah, I really like that question a lot, actually, because in my current role, I straddle two parts of our organization. The first part is that commercial strategy, and things like opportunities like digital first and engagement are very much top of mind. And with that, as I shared with you before and at the outset of our conversation, it really is about getting product to patient, and so that we can appropriate patient, so that we can have that patient have that better quality of life sooner. And so, on that commercial strategy side, that's the goal with anything that we do. The other half of what I focus on is actually assessing opportunities for us to bring in new innovation, new technology. And the role is really to put rigorous commercial assessment at any phase within our own internal R&D and development process, or any external opportunity we're looking to license or acquire. And so I've got a very specific framework that I've developed for Ardelyx in itself. It's not the framework that I have at Ardelyx, but I do have an article actually that was published in Life Sciences Leader today. I'll send it to you if you want to link it to the podcast. That talks a bit about how you can go about building a framework. I advocate in that to really think through commercial early and often, and not the depth of commercialization, but at every phase of development, there are some key commercial questions that you need to ask and address. And so, when you're getting to that phase, let's say 2, you really should start to tighten a bit of a target product profile. Meaningful with KOL engagement and feedback, and understanding how they're viewing these patients, how they would utilize a treatment for whatever disease that we're looking at, and then what would be the outcome that they would look for, so that you can make sure that the R&D team has really good visibility to what's viable in the space and how we can add value for patients and providers. So, at every phase, and as you mature the product into phase 3 and beyond, the rigor gets heavier and heavier. So, it's a really interesting part of my role. I get to look at a lot of different things across the spectrum. But I do think, and I absolutely believe, that earlier you can get and ask some commercial questions and put some rigor into the assessment, the better the outcome will be in the end for that product and for patients as well.
Yeah, I like that. And it's just, thinking about that a little further, right, with your two product releases that you have. I mean, you've developed a lot of momentum with your team. So I'm wondering, with that approach, with that alignment of commercial teams, that innovation, that patient impact at scale, thinking about we're going to scale now, right? And you've got, how would you take that, or what would your advice be to other MedTech companies or innovators out there about getting it from that place, and then that maybe that hockey stick growth? Do you have any thoughts for us in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I said just a couple minutes ago, if your questions are tight and right, and your assessment is done well, as you progress the product through phases, your commercial story will actually be able to unwind based off of that. You have to have a solid foundation of commercialization. So We're really fortunate. We've got one product with two great indications, and we are a commercial stage company in growth phase. We intend to leverage our commercial capabilities. We've got a really great commercial foundation, and that's not built overnight. I take a step back every time we look at a opportunity and think through. There are always trade-offs in any stage and any phase of the company. And so as you're building your own company, my advice is really assess the trade-offs. And if you can truly trade off, then fine. But if you can try to find a way to actually answer the key questions that you need to, do that. I see a lot of companies that may have traded off things because either time or resourcing or capital constraints, and they don't end up always in the best hands or in the best place in the end. And I think it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and lots of opportunity to help patients that we miss on if the rigor isn't put in there. So I think that just really assess those trade-offs if you're in an earlier stage company, so that when you get to that commercial stage, you've got that story built. And then the foundation of commercialization has to be really solid to succeed, launch
Yeah.
and beyond.
I like that. And if I'm hearing you right, it's taking the time to do the homework, get those kind of foundational principles and outcomes in place, and then the rest will kind of take care of itself. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Absolutely. And Tom, I've also gotten the question of, well, we can't hire everyone, right? And that's absolutely true. So leverage, flexible talent, leverage network, leverage, of course, always protect your IP if you're an earlier stage company, but leverage people who have the depth of experience and the breadth of experience. Leverage your board members. They come with a lot of experience, hopefully, and make sure you've got the right board members. But you can certainly answer those questions in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always require capital commitment.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, actually. So, Shetal, this seems like a really exciting time for you and your team at Ardelyx. What does the future hold? Where are you going from here?
Yeah, like I said, we are a growth stage organization, so growth is the goal. We are very, very committed to continue to commercialize Ibsrela and Xphozah. The team has a lot of excitement around both of those, and our intention is to continue to grow from where we are today.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, first of all, Sheeta, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you for the time it took to be our guru today. If somebody wants to learn more, is there a website? Are you on LinkedIn? How do we find out more about you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Ardelyx has a LinkedIn page. And then also they certainly can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Shetal Vyas.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much once again for being our guru today. We really appreciated your time and your insights.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate the opportunity and really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.